Each day brought a new envelope stamped with HOA Compliance Office across the front. Inside were notices, each one more aggressive than the last. The fine started at $50 a day, then jumped to $100. They claimed his fence caused a visual inconsistency, detrimental to community appeal. Anthony read the words out loud in his kitchen, shaking his head. Visual inconsistency, he muttered. I'm raising cattle, not hosting weddings. Glenn was sitting across the table, sipping his black coffee. They know exactly what they're doing, he said. They keep piling it on until you either give up or start bleeding money. That evening, Anthony decided to attend the next HOA meeting, not to argue, but to listen. He figured the more he understood their tactics, the better his chances of finding a weak spot. The clubhouse was packed again, this time with a strange tension in the air. A woman Anthony hadn't met before, Paula Green, stood at the front complaining about a tree the HOA had forced her to cut down. She glanced at Anthony mid-sentence, then quickly looked away. When the meeting moved to new compliance matters, Marjorie glanced at him but didn't call his name. Instead, she rattled off a list of other infractions. An RV parked too long in a driveway, a shed painted the wrong color, someone's porch light too bright. Anthony watched carefully. The tone was always the same, cold, efficient, and backed by the threat of fines. Afterward, in the parking lot, Paula walked up to him. You're Ridley, right? The rancher with the fence issue? That's me, Anthony said. They're going to wear you down until you either give up or move out, she warned. Marjorie's been doing this for years. She doesn't care who you are. She cares about winning. Anthony studied her face. Why do people let her keep winning? Paula's answer was quiet. Because most folks don't want trouble, and Marjorie knows how to make trouble feel expensive. The conversation stuck with him. He realized the HOA wasn't just enforcing rules. It was building a culture where fear kept everyone in line. And now, by refusing to bow, he was drawing a line of his own. The next day, Anthony called the HOA office. I'm requesting mediation, he told the woman who answered. I want to sit down with the board and find a compromise. When the mediation day came, he walked into the room with photographs of his cattle, maps of the property, and documentation of every conversation so far. Marjorie sat across the table, flipping through a thin binder, as if she already knew the outcome. Mr. Ridley, the mediator began, the HOA is willing to waive some of the fines if you agree to replace your fence within 60 days. Anthony shook his head. That's not a compromise. That's your original demand with a discount. Marjorie interjected. We're being generous here, Mr. Ridley. Most people don't get this kind of consideration. Anthony leaned forward. Most people don't have their animals trapped behind a locked gate either. This isn't just about a fence. It's about my livelihood, and you're standing in the way of it. The mediator shifted uncomfortably. Let's focus on practical options. The practical option is you give me back access to my own road and stop pretending you're doing me a favor. Marjorie's smile didn't reach her eyes. We'll be in touch, she said, standing to leave. The meeting ended without resolution. That night, Anthony sat on his porch long after the sun went down, listening to the distant calls of his cattle. The line had been drawn, and neither side was going to cross it willingly. But he didn't know yet that the fight was about to shift from quiet paperwork to something much more public and dangerous. The real breaking point came on a windy Thursday morning. Anthony had been up since dawn fixing a trough pump near the north pasture. As he walked toward the creek, he noticed his cattle clustered near the new perimeter fence, restless and pacing. He followed their gaze and saw the problem. The creek was now completely inaccessible. The new fencing didn't just block the road, it cut off the only reliable water source on that side of the property. He dropped his gloves on the ground and climbed over the fence, his boots thudding against the packed dirt. On the other side, the locked gate stood like a challenge in front of him, the thick steel shackle gleaming in the morning light. He rattled it hard. The sound echoed across the pasture. No movement. No one to answer. By mid-morning, he was on the phone with the HOA office again. "I need access to that creek immediately," he told the receptionist. "My cattle can't be cut off from water. This is basic animal welfare." Her tone was clipped. "Mr. Ridley, the HOA has confirmed there are other water points on your property. Those tanks are for backup. If we hit a heat wave, they won't last a week. Do you want to be responsible for dead cattle? She can forward your concern to the board, but I can't authorize access." That afternoon, Anthony drove straight to Marjorie's house. Her place was immaculate. Freshly painted siding, trimmed hedges, not a leaf out of place. She opened the door wearing a pale blue blouse, her expression polite but guarded. "This isn't about fines anymore," Anthony said, keeping his voice steady. "It's about my animals. You're cutting them off from water." Marjorie's reply was smooth, almost rehearsed. "Mr. Ridley, the HOA operates under a uniform standard. If we make exceptions, it undermines the integrity of the community." "Integrity of the community," his voice rose. "You're talking about a fence. I'm talking about living creatures depending on me to keep them alive." Her expression didn't change. "The rules are the rules." Anthony took a step back, clenching his fists to keep from saying something he'd regret. "This isn't over, Marjorie." As he walked away, he caught a glimpse of movement behind her curtains. Neighbors peeking out, watching. The fight was no longer just between him and the HOA president. It was becoming a spectacle. 2 days later, the first signs of stress appeared in his herd. A few cattle stood near the fence, bellowing toward the creek. Anthony brought in extra water tanks, but the process of hauling and refilling them was exhausting and expensive. Glenn came over to help one afternoon, leaning against the truck as they unloaded another tank. "She's playing hardball, trying to wear you down until you give in," Glenn said. "She's not getting what she wants," Anthony replied, pulling a wrench from the toolbox. "I'll keep hauling water if I have to, but I'm not rebuilding that fence just to match her idea of beauty." Still, the stress was building. By the end of the week, Anthony was running on little sleep, juggling ranch work with constant letters and notices from the HOA. One envelope included a photo someone had taken from the road, showing one of his water tanks slightly tilted. The letter claimed it was a safety hazard and demanded its removal. "That's harassment," Glenn said after reading it. "That's Marjorie," Anthony replied. Then, one morning, the situation shifted. A for sale sign appeared on the small half-acre lot that contained the locked gate. The land was technically separate from both his ranch and the HOA's main holdings. Anthony stood there staring at the sign, the gears in his mind turning fast. If he owned that strip of land, he'd own the gate. And if he owned the gate, the lock would be his. But he knew if Marjorie caught wind of his plan, she'd find a way to stop it. So whatever he did next would have to be fast and quiet. He didn't rush straight to the real estate office. He knew better than that. That afternoon, he drove into Abilene and sat down with Tom Beard, a local attorney whose office smelled faintly of old paper and fresh coffee. Tom had the kind of handshake that told you he'd been in business a long time. Anthony spread out the letters, photos, and the latest HOA notices on Tom's desk. "I want to know if what they're doing is even legal. And if I buy the land with that gate on it, does it give me full control?" Tom adjusted his glasses, scanning the documents. "They're operating within the covenants you signed when you bought the property," he said slowly. "That's the bad news. Those rules were built into the agreement, and they give the HOA more control than most folks realize." "And the good news?" Anthony asked. Tom tapped the photo of the for sale sign. "If that parcel really is separate from HOA ownership, and it's got the only gate access to your property, then yes, you'd have every legal right to control it. But you'll need to verify that before making a move. And you'll need to make the purchase in a way that doesn't trigger alarm bells." "Meaning Marjorie can't know it's me?" "Exactly," Tom said. "If she finds out, she could pressure the seller or try to rezone the land before the sale closes. You need to keep your name out of it entirely." For the next few days, Anthony kept his normal routine. He fed the cattle, hauled water, waved at neighbors. But inside, he was counting down the days. When the closing finally came, Anthony drove quietly into town, signed the papers under Brett's LLC, and walked out with the keys. For the first time in months, he felt like the ground was shifting back under his boots. Back at the ranch, he parked near the gate. The metal was cool under his hand. He slid the key into the lock, turned it, and heard the satisfying click of freedom. The shackle popped open. He swung the gate wide, letting his cattle wander to the creek for the first time in weeks. 2 days later, a white SUV pulled up. Marjorie stepped out, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Ridley, you've accessed HOA property without permission." "Not anymore," he said. "This land's mine. Check the county records." Her eyes narrowed. "That's impossible." "Maybe, but it's true." She glared, turned on her heel, and left without a